We're excited to hear about our faculty's pro bono engagement, but first I just want to give you some quick background. As you know, Roger Williams University School of Law has a 50-hour pro bono requirement. This is modeled on ABA Model Rule 6.1, which is up on the screen. Every lawyer has a professional responsibility to provide legal services to those unable to pay. A lawyer should aspire to render at least 50 hours of pro bono publico legal services per year. Not only is this a long-standing professional responsibility for lawyers, it is essential to addressing the enormous justice gap we have in this country, and to providing some measure of access to justice for those who are low income and disenfranchised. RWU Law is doing its part to contribute pro bono services and to instilling in you all, our law students, the critically important ethic of pro bono legal service. With that in mind, now for the stars of our program. Each faculty member will tell us about their engagement with pro bono legal service, what they did, why they did it, and what it meant to them. So we're going to start off with Professor Logan.
Thank you, Eliza. I'm going to use 1 minute of my allotted time to reflect on the significance of the Feinstein Institute in the very fabric of our law school. There are very few places that have as deep a commitment to public service and pro bono as Roger Williams. And it's not just talk, it's manifested in all the programs that the Feinstein Institute does. And as some of you know, we've been recognized in a number of different forms for being one of the top schools in the country for encouraging pro bono, including one of the first adopters, am I right, Eliza, the 50-hour pro bono requirement. So, it's just important for students to understand the context. This is not a random occurrence at Roger Williams, that you've got faculty that cares about this stuff. It's a part of a mindset. So very quickly, it's always dangerous to ask an old lawyer about his practice days because, and that's me, I'm an old lawyer. And unlike most of my colleagues, their pro bono discussions will probably be something in the last, let's say, 500 years. In my case, the story I'm going to tell was from 45 years ago when I was a rookie lawyer in Washington. And my firm, one of the reasons I went there was one of the relatively few sort of big corporate firms that represented Native American tribes. And I just had this thing about how we had been screwing the Native Americans for all these years, and maybe I could figure out a way to help, but I could still get a prestigious law firm job that would help me get a law teaching job. So this was strategic on my part. And so the firm was cranking along. And as happens at big firms, one day a partner called me into the office and said, I've accepted a pro bono case and I want you to take it. And basically what that means is the partners get all the glory and all the work is done by the schmucks at the bottom of the food chain. That would be me. So here's what happened. As you may know, in the United States, there are about 300 federally recognized Native American tribes, but there's a whole lot more groups that don't have federal recognition. And one of them happened to be called the Piscataway. Those of you that are New Jersey fans, there's a place called Piscataway, New Jersey. And there was a tribe that lived in New Jersey and also at one point sojourned down to suburban Maryland outside of DC. And they settled there. And it was probably a couple of hundred people for maybe 100 years or so. And after a while, as so often happens for the sort of non-organized tribes, they sort of scattered into the general population and became, Native Americans in some sense, but not in a day-to-day sense for reasons that were, pretty obvious. Turned out this group decided they wanted to have a religious ceremony in a park that was run by the Department of Interior. And as you might guess, the Department of Interior has rules about, for example, whether you can have open fires in the parks after dark. And they had a rule in this park that said no fires after dark. And this tribe, or the remnants of this tribe, showed me the map where, like in 1700, their ancestors lived, and said, we want to have a sweat lodge ceremony on this piece of land, but the federal government won't let us do it. Will you help us? Trust me, they could not pay a fee. And also trust me, the partner had no interest in doing it, but was glad to say yes, and then call me down to his office and say, I want you to figure this out for me. And so I spent, a month talking to Department of Interior people saying, listen, we can figure out a way so there won't be a fire hazard. I will guarantee there'll be someone with a fire extinguisher there. Why not let this tribe have a religious ceremony in this park? It matters to them. And as you may know, sweat lodge ceremonies are sort of central to a lot of Native American religious traditions, because the idea is that as you sweat and sweat and sweat in incredible heat, you have hallucinations and you find visions that are important about your ancestors. So this was religiously significant. It wasn't my religion. It certainly wasn't the religion of the Department of Interior people I talked about. Basically, I negotiated with them over a period of a month an agreement that allowed them to have this ceremony, build a sweat lodge out of sticks, light a fire after dark, and spend the night doing important religious things. That's my story, but I'll add one last thing. It was pro bono, there was no fee. And at the end of it, they said, we can't pay you, but would you like to join us in our sweat lodge ceremony? I'm not a Native American. I don't know much about your background, but yeah, sure. And I lasted about an hour. I was so damn hot. I felt like my eyeballs were coming out of my head. And it was a great experience, but 1 hour in a sweat lodge was enough for this camper. So I've got a couple, but that's my 1 5-minute pro bono story.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Professor Gott.
There we go. I thought I hit the button, but I didn't. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here tonight. So like David, my pro bono experience came to me by way of my very large law firm, where I started working right after graduating from law school. And in fact, my second day of work, I believe, was September 11th. And very soon thereafter, I was thrown into the middle of a giant piece of discovery where I sat in a conference room with 10 other attorneys and just reviewed documents after documents after documents, late into the night, ate a lot of what today would be Uber Eats or DoorDash with my colleagues. And just as I was starting to wonder what exactly I was doing there, I got this fantastic case that came my way. And I met my client. And my client's name was Marie Bakutu, and she came from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And our job was to help her win asylum in the United States, because Marie had suffered, I don't know, the word unimaginable is an understatement. Trauma, really just trauma at the hands of her government. Her husband was suspected of working with rebel forces in the DRC. And as a result, one day some government soldiers came to her house, killed her husband in front of her and her 3 children, took her children, 3 kids, didn't know where they went, just took them, and threw my client into a government prison. And by the grace of God, and with the help of a priest, and this is like the stuff of movies, she made her way to the United States. And shortly thereafter, this great nonprofit organization named PAIR that dedicates themselves to helping asylum seekers, but they can't manage all the caseloads, right? So what they do is they outsource some of these cases to the large firms and other organizations who can help. So our job was to prepare her asylum application. And a big part of that was not only drafting the asylum application and kind of putting her story in writing for the INS, but also sort of conducting interview after interview after interview with our client, because when she was supposed to go in front of the INS agent, part of the role of the INS is essentially to test the credibility of these asylum seekers. And so we had to, in a very sensitive way, extract all the details of her very, very sensitive and traumatic story over the course of several months. And I found myself doing things that, some of which law school had prepared me for, but a lot that it didn't. This is Marie. And I'll tell you why in a minute, she's sitting there smiling as big as can be in the middle of Logan International Airport at the arrival station. But, you know, a lot of what we did was I had to win her trust, right? I mean, that was a big part of it, because in order to get her to talk, she had to trust me. So I had a client whose trust I had to earn. And I remember, like, one of the ways I did that was to always make sure that I had a lot of food for her at these meetings. Marie loved food. She loved to eat, and she hadn't had a lot of really great food in the last several years. So we always had food. You know, I always encouraged her to take the food home. We spent like the first 10, 15 minutes of every interview just chatting and just making small talk, just in an effort to make her comfortable, which is kind of what you do with any client, right? Any client who walks in the door, not to mention a client who has this kind of sensitive story. So we were successful. She went in front of the INS, she won asylum, but the story didn't end there. And I think the best part of the story that had the most lasting impact on me is that sometime later, probably a year or two later, we found out that the Red Cross had located her children. So keep in mind, she hadn't seen her kids in, like, now we're like fast forward 6 years, hadn't seen her kids. They were young, you know, they were like 10, 11, 12 years old at the time that she last saw them. And we worked with a nonprofit organization essentially to bring them here. And there were a lot of players. It was not just me, it was not just my colleague who worked on the case with me. There were a lot of people who helped make it happen. And it sort of culminated with this amazing reunion that happened at Logan International Airport. And, you know, I talked to my colleague today to kind of help remind me about some of the details, the person I'd worked with. And she still says, like, that day was probably one of the best moments of her life. And this is what it looked like. So there's Marie reuniting with her 2 daughters, Lydia and Angel, and her son, Matthew.
Wow.
It was just, you know, I don't know. I don't know that I'll ever witness anything like that before. And just, you know, seeing this woman who was so broken, whose doctor almost hospitalized her on a couple of occasions because she was suffering from such severe depression, seeing her go from that to kind of, you know, getting the joy back in her face. And this was like a couple years later at a birthday party she invited us to. You know, she just looked like a different person. And, you know, what did this mean to me? Well, it meant everything. It meant everything. It was at a time that was so difficult. Like, you know, our country had just gone through this major terrorist attack. And it just gave me some meaning, right? It kind of reminded me why I went to law school. And I don't know that, you know, I had a couple clients subsequent to that who I also helped win political asylum. One of whom I'll just show you as I wrap up, gifted me with this like beautiful traditional African dress that I just love. It kind of looks like the one Maria's wearing in this picture. And yeah, I'd echo my colleague. It was one of the best moments of my life.
Wow. Irina, thank you so much. That was incredibly moving, and also really underscores the power of the law and the privilege of our legal training to make a difference in people's lives who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. Okay, next up is Professor Humber.
I don't know how I'm going to follow that up, Irina, but I will try. Thank you for inviting me on this panel. So I'll just sort of go through the questions. So when I feel like my pro bono work started when I was in law school. I was always in one way or another volunteering when I was in law school. And my pro bono work really has continued every single year since I've graduated. And I graduated in 2011. So I've always been an active volunteer just because I really truly believe in the power of pro bono. So where am I volunteering now? So currently I'm actually volunteering and doing pro bono work so I'm barred in Massachusetts. So a lot of the work that I do is in Massachusetts. All of the work that I do is in Massachusetts in terms of pro bono. So I am volunteering at the Volunteer Lawyers Project and also at South Coast Fair Housing. So Volunteer Lawyers Project is in Boston and South Coast Fair Housing is in New Bedford. And they also have a satellite office in Rhode Island. So the work that I'm doing there is related to, with VLP, I do housing, landlord eviction, landlord tenant representation, have clients who are, help with hearings, help with general counseling of Massachusetts housing laws, fair housing, that sort of thing. And with South Coast Fair Housing, I'm working on some more sort of systemic issues related to discrimination in housing work. Most currently, I'm going to be writing a demand letter to, and I won't name names, but to a state agency that is removing their satellite office from a certain community that is going to put constituents in a really difficult situation because they will no longer be able to easily travel to hearings and conciliations and that sort of thing. So we're working on contacting legislators and the press and this and that. So that's happening tomorrow. So very active right now, but a good thing that's all happening. So why did I choose these locations, and why do I do pro bono? I do it for different reasons. So certainly to stay connected to community. I feel like as I transition from practice and into academia, it's just a way for me to really just stay connected to community and just really stay clued into what's happening on the ground. I also chose, for those of you who are interested in doing pro bono that might not necessarily do it through a law firm practice, but in other organizations, I did it for the flexibility as well. I find that I can take cases when I want. I can take different types of cases, all different types of cases that I want, and it's nice to have that flexibility. Of course, you're committed to a client once you're working with them, but to be able to have sort of the freedom to pick and choose when you can and can't do something is very helpful. So just something to think about. There are agencies out there that you can do that with. And also for those of you who might one day want to, go into solo practice or have a small law firm and you're not familiar with a certain area of law, pro bono, of course, is rewarding for just making a difference, but it's also great for professional development as well. If you are interested in transitioning to a new area of law, pro bono work is a really great way to sort of get your feet wet and understand how to represent a client properly before you go out and do it on your own. So just sort of a practical tidbit there. And the way my pro bono work makes me feel is just, it's extremely rewarding. It makes me feel like I, of course, am making a difference. Everything that, I echo everything that Irina said and Professor Gott and Professor Logan said. And it's just, it's really great to just know that I'm still making a difference in the community. So that's all of my reasons.
Thank you, Professor Humbert. And also thank you for sort of demonstrating that even with an incredibly busy work life, which I know personally you have, you are still able to incorporate pro bono service. So that's great. Thank you. And next we have Professor Margulies.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to talk about a couple of matters involving attorneys. The first one is a Supreme Court case called Padilla versus Kentucky. It's a 2010 case in which the Supreme Court held that it was ineffective assistance of counsel to fail to advise a criminal defendant about the reasonably foreseeable immigration consequences of a criminal conviction. In that case, the petitioner, Padilla, had been found by the cops with about 100 pounds of marijuana in his car trunk. He talked to his attorney, who said, you can plead guilty to possession with intent to sell. It's not a big deal for immigration purposes because you've been here for a long time. Padilla had been here for 40 years. In fact, it served in our armed forces. And lawyer said, you've been here a long time. Immigration can't touch you. Wrong. Immigration could touch Padilla, and in fact, they sought to deport him. And Padilla then went all the way to the Supreme Court saying, this was ineffective assistance of counsel, and it deprived me of my fair trial rights under the Sixth Amendment. I was co-counsel with a number of other attorneys for the American Bar Association in writing amicus brief in this case. Included in that effort was Tony Amsterdam, the legendary Supreme Court advocate who was taught at NYU, and also Nancy Moravec, great clinical law professor at NYU. And indeed, Professor Nikki Cuquez of our school had a role in this case, at least indirectly, because she helped craft the ABA criminal justice standards that the Supreme Court cited to in Padilla. And the case is great as an opinion by Justice Stevens that held that you had to provide reasonably competent immigration advice, knowing that that is often more important for lawful residents than advice about a time in jail that they might otherwise suffer, because being separated from friends and family, being deported from the US is the paramount immigration consequence for a lot of those folks. I was most happy to do that case, to be part of that effort, part of that community. The second case is one that's going on right now. And in that case, I'm working with another distinguished advocate from the Rhode Island Bar, that is Ellen Marjorie Seidman, who also happens to be my wife and a former legal writing instructor, now we call legal practice faculty at Roger Williams. And Ellen was brought into this case that involves a proposed opinion by the New Jersey Unauthorized Practice of Law, or UPL committee. In that opinion, the New Jersey committee held that lawyers, rather advocates, non-lawyer advocates, could not participate in individualized education plan meetings, that is IEP meetings, on behalf of parents of kids with disabilities. They couldn't speak at those meetings, although they could negotiate. Query how you can negotiate without speaking. That was just one of the problems with this proposed opinion. But my wife and I, along with a national effort involving my wife's current organization, the Council of Parents, Advocates, and Attorneys, or COPA, and a number of distinguished lawyers and also social scientists from all the country who studied this issue and concluded that parents desperately need the help of lay advocates, are submitting comments to the New Jersey Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee to get them to change their mind, to convince them that, one, often what advocates do, although it's vital for parents who can't afford lawyers, is something that isn't really the practice of law. And even if it is the practice of law, it's definitely in the public interest to have this resource available, given that there are roughly 250,000 kids in New Jersey alone who have disabilities, who need individualized education programs, and often school districts, if you don't have an advocate there, are not really responsive to parents' needs. So there too, I'm happy to do that work, particularly with my wife, but in general, it's a great cause. And it points up to not just the skills development piece of pro bono that Nadia talked about, because you're always learning. That's one of the beautiful things about doing lawyering work and pro bono particularly. You're always learning new things, always gaining new friends, but you're part of this community. So even though we don't know what's going to happen in this case, we know we're on the right side of this fight. And that's what's really fulfilling about it.
Thank you, Peter. Just a quick question. When you were co-counsel on the amicus brief, who were you on whose behalf?
Well, that was for the American Bar Association, and co-counsel in that case included someone named Margie Love, who used to be the pardon attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice in the Clinton administration. Also, a guy named Jack Chin, who's a professor of law at UC Davis Law School, and Bruce Green, known to David Logan as well as perhaps others on this panel, who is a former law clerk to Thurgood Marshall, is now a professor at Fordham Law School.
Got it. So interesting for people to learn that the ABA gets involved as amicus before the Supreme Court sometimes.
Frequently.
On cases like this, an immigration case.
That's right.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Raposa.
Yes, thank you. So like Professor Humber, I've been doing pro bono work in law school, and then when I left, and the pro bono work centers in family law. So I get a lot of my family law pro bono work from the Bristol County Bar Association referral list. And then I am on the pro bono guardian ad litem list in the Bristol County Court, and also on the list to be an ARC attorney, which is an attorney appointed for the rights of the child in Bristol County. So typically I get appointed in high conflict divorces where the parents are like nuts and the child needs a voice, or in a lot of child neglect and abuse cases. So I can represent the child. And so I think that one of the the things that's really rewarding about pro bono work, especially in what I am doing, is the family law aspect of it. It's so personal, and it's really easy to get it taken advantage of in family court. So a lot of times when I get appointed or I take a case, it's because the other side has an attorney, and my client just can't afford it. And so, or other times I do like guardianships for someone who can't afford it, or conservatorships. So appointing someone to take care of a disabled person's money, and things like that. But I did a lot of pro bono work this summer, and I took more cases than ever because it was a pandemic and I was sad and I wanted to do pro bono work to just help people because I felt kind of helpless in the pandemic. And it's just the people you meet are tremendous and they should get representation. And just because people can't afford it, it doesn't mean they shouldn't be represented. And so I'll never forget, it was in June or July. I got the call from the Bristol County Bar Association saying, you're the perfect person for this case. They're looking for a guardianship. Here she is. And I looked at the file and I saw that she was 18 years old. And I said, well, she's 18, so she doesn't need a guardian. And they're like, no, she's looking to be the guardian of her four younger siblings. And so we met via Zoom, and her mother was dying of pancreatic cancer and had either a day to whenever to live. And so she needed a guardianship ASAP because their father was very abusive. And the last time they saw their father, but no one knows this because it didn't get reported or anything. The last time they saw their father, he broke into their home with a gun and threatened to shoot them up, quote unquote. So if the mother died without a guardianship, then they would automatically revert to custody of the father. So we were trying to prevent that. And so I met the mother. She was so amazing. We got the guardianship and she passed the next day. And so it was just, and so the family, I think, is now intact. Sister is involved, aunt is helping out. But we did that. And I just felt like it just, sometimes you need a reminder when you're an attorney of why you do this, especially divorce. It can be so petty. Or custody cases, it can be very petty. And sometimes you just need a reminder of why. And pro bono work will always give you that reminder. It will always make you remember why you went to law school. I will make sure those 4 girls have Christmas presents this year. You also make connections. I already started Christmas shopping for them, delivery from Santa. It's just so rewarding, and you really do build community. And I think that I take so many pro bono cases to the extent that I can with the bar exam and everything, but because I just love doing it, and I find it so much more fulfilling than taking a divorce case that's paid. And so I also feel fulfilled being this bar exam instructor, knowing that I'm helping people pass the bar to hopefully help someone too. So I hope that I'm in some way doing that.
Wow, thank you, Brittany. Family law, as many of you know, but maybe the students don't, is one of the largest areas of unmet legal need on the civil side. And almost always it involves children who are in the crosshairs of those cases. So thank you for that. Finally, we have Assistant Dean Horowitz, and I hope that you will include the recent story from your from the Providence.
I will. I understood my instructions to tell that story. I'm happy to tell that story.
Thank you.
So hi, everybody. Good to see you all here. I have always done a lot of pro bono work. Well, I shouldn't say always. The first 6 years of my career when I was a public defender, I found it very challenging and almost impossible to be able to do anything outside of that. But when I left that piece of my career and entered academics, one of the joys of being an academic is that we have the freedom to take on pro bono work because we have a salary coming in elsewhere that we don't have to worry about. And it's a great joy and privilege, and I think a really important part of what I do. So over the years, I've done some litigation, a lot of litigation actually for the ACLU. I've done some for the NAACP here locally. I had an Innocence Project case that I handled with a colleague, Professor David Zlotnick, that probably was in very much the way Professor Gott was describing her matter, one of the most sort of emotional and deeply satisfying things I've ever done as a lawyer. But in recent times, I focused most of my pro bono energy on, I've become sort of obsessed with a problem that poor people have in our society in terms of the way they get buried with fines, fees, and costs that really make it impossible for them to survive and to prosper. And in particular, on the area of driver's licenses. So I work with a variety of community organizations so that I represent people who are coming out of prison. And we're very foolish in this country. People come out of prison and we say, good luck and try and get a job and try and find a place to live. But by the way, if you want a driver's license, you have to pay off the $5,000 in debt that you accumulated before you ever went to prison. So I work with veterans organizations. I work with the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, a variety of organizations, and wind up now through the Pro Bono Collaborative, which I'm thrilled about, working with a variety of folks in an effort to try and get driver's licenses restored and help people get back sort of on a path to, comfortable and more productive life. So the story that Eliza is asking me to tell, which I'm happy to, I had a client through the Pro Bono Collaborative, a woman who was experiencing homelessness, was living in her car with her child, and living in the car, but had a suspended driver's license, which is really far from ideal. So I worked with her and was able successfully to get her fines reduced significantly with a very modest payment, down payment. She was put on a payment plan and her license reinstated. And just after we were celebrating that, within days, another moment of celebration, she was actually, through the coalition, able to obtain housing. So all of a sudden, she and her daughter, who was, I believe, 6 years old, got an apartment, and they parked in front of the apartment, and they came out the next day, and there was a boot on the car. So turns out that when she was living in the car, you can't park overnight in Providence unless you have a parking permit. And the only way you get a parking permit is by owning or renting a property in Providence, which of course was not her situation. So she had accumulated a variety of parking tickets, many of them accumulated while she and her daughter were asleep in the car. And the police would just come and write the ticket and put it on her windshield. So I appeared before Judge Caprio. Some of you may know Judge Caprio from his TV show, Caught in Providence, which used to just be local cable access, but now is nationally syndicated. And there's a big sign that says to people, you have a right not to be on camera. You have a right not to appear on this TV show. And I spoke to her, and she was appearing with her daughter, and we were going to make a presentation about the ways in which she had experienced homelessness. And she decided, frankly, I sort of encouraged this decision because I don't like the idea of my clients being exposed to national TV. So she had said, no, thanks. I won't be on TV. And I told the production crew that. They tell the judge that. The judge is not usually happy about that. So we get in front of the judge. We sort of tell her story. The judge starts asking her a variety of questions. She really responds beautifully with a pretty vivid description of what she had experienced and whatnot. And then Judge Caprio reaches into his pocket. It's a very strange thing. Pulls out cash and says, I'm going to do something for you. People watch my TV show. They send in money. They ask me to give people money. And I want to give you money to help you get settled in your new apartment. And he counts out $50 in cash and has his bailiff sort of take the $50 in cash and hand it to her. She completely breaks down, sobbing, incredibly emotional, says, you know, up until recently, nobody's ever done anything nice for me. She points to Megan, the social worker from the homeless organization I work with, who was there, and talks about what she did. She thanks me for what I've been doing. Her daughter asks Judge Caprio if she can come and give Judge Caprio a hug, which, you know, he agrees to. They're masked. I mean, it was really quite an emotional moment. So she leaves. The judge calls me up to the bench and says, really, we can't put that on TV? So I go outside into the hallway and talk to her. And she says, yes, now that I understand what happened and now that I sort of understand what would be broadcast, yes, please go ahead. And Judge Caprio sort of made a thing about naming the organization, the House of Hope, which is a fabulous local organization. And Caprio seems to think his viewers are likely to send money into this organization, which would be a spectacular thing. So, you know, that kind of moment, you know, it's really special to be able to work with folks who really need some extra attention, somebody to care, somebody to pay attention, somebody to advocate for them. That really means the world to a lot of folks, and it means the world to me to be able to do it. It's one of the great privileges of being a lawyer, and probably the most enjoyable part of what I do most days. So that's my story.
Thank you very much. You might have mentioned this, but I'm not sure you did. Judge Caprio did wipe out all of those tickets, correct? In addition, to the...
I didn't say that. I suppose maybe it was implied, but I should have said it explicitly. Wiped out all the parking tickets. There's also a pretty heavy fine that you have to pay to get the boot removed. He wiped that out too. And then when Megan and I left, we were a little concerned about the mechanics of that, but Megan drove her right to her car. And by the time she had arrived at the car, the boot was gone. And it was really miraculous.
And you turned somebody's life around. So that is our panel, and I want to first throw it out to see if any of the law students would like to ask any questions or make any comments before.
Liza, before you start, I'm guessing some else don't know about the Pro Bono Collaborative. That's name has popped up a couple times. You might want to explain to them the context in which some of our pro bono work is being done by students in particular, right?
Yep. Okay, I'm happy to do that. So the Pro Bono Collaborative, which was launched under Professor Logan's wonderful support, and when he was dean, was launched in 2006, which is when I came to the law school. And it is a program that's pretty unique in the country because it's a way of doing pro bono in a project or team basis. We partner private lawyers and law firms with community-based organizations that serve low-income people and law students to provide free legal services to organizations that serve low-income communities and to the people that they serve. Assistant Dean Horowitz was doing all of this license restoration work before we created the license restoration project of the Pro Bono Collaborative. But when we did, we brought in several private attorneys and a law firm to support that work so that Professor Horowitz could take more cases and could sort of send out some of the cases that other lawyers could handle. And we have a variety of other projects. We have an expungement project that I think is similarly powerful in that we help people get their records expunged or sealed. Unfortunately, the expungement law in Rhode Island isn't very forgiving. So we don't have quite as much success as I think we do on our license restoration project. But we also have immigration projects and special education project, nonprofit health projects, like one that we just launched yesterday with the Tamaquag Museum, which is the only Indigenous museum in New England, and a brand new firm to the Pro Bono Collaborative, Duffy Sweeney, is going to be working with them and a third-year law student to do, to help them with their employment policies and do some contract work related to their expansion and things like that. So it's a huge range, and law students are always involved. The street law inviter are part of that program as well. And we would love to get our students involved. So anybody is interested, feel free to reach out. Whenever we have a student opening on the Pro Bono Collaborative, we send out an email to the whole student body. But while I have you here, Professor Logan, I will thank you formally for all of your support for the Pro Bono Collaborative, because it started out, we had to raise the money from first the Rhode Island Foundation and then from the legal community before ultimately it was brought into the law school.
So I'm gonna make one last comment, and that is, Laura, you probably remember the day when you put together the program that convinced essentially me and a lot of other, Michael Yonoski and other people, this was a viable model that really hadn't been done elsewhere. And we were able to take it to the Rhode Island Foundation, which is the largest nonprofit organization in the state. And it planted the seed so you could bring Susie and Eliza on board and really make this now, what, we're closing on 20 years, right?
Well, 15. Yeah,
Okay,
exactly 15 since I started. Yep. So yeah, it's
it was Lori's idea. It came from her program.
Yep.
In 2006, was it, Lori? When was it?
2005, and it was Liz Tobin Tyler at the time, and we had a researcher, Jen Modell, who had done a study. So it was a lot of people. It wasn't. I don't take credit for it, but it was a lot. It took a village, and we got it funded, and here we are, much later.
And it's attracted national recognition and some accolades, so that's cool. But it's just a piece of how you can do your pro bono legal service here at the law school. Do any students have questions? Katie, good. Oh, and Carla, great. So let's start with Katie. Oh, you're on mute.
It'll take a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing and putting this together. I had a question for Professor Humber. I saw that you had worked with South Coast Fair Housing, which one of the things that they have been working really centrally on is Section 8 housing discrimination in Rhode Island and elsewhere. And I was curious as to whether you had worked on that campaign, and if you could talk a little bit about kind of how doing pro bono work with a housing organization, beyond doing eviction defense work, like kind of what that looks like, and what your work on with that organization was like.
Yeah, great question, Katie. So when they initially, what South Coast Fair Housing did was they put out a study that they had done about in the Rhode Island area, and the policy purpose behind it is to try to get housing or voucher discrimination to be a state protected category. So they actually did that work before I started volunteering with them. A lot of that work was done prior, but currently they're actually working on an initiative in Canton, Rhode Island right now, where they're trying to get the community to have sort of a local ordinance put into place to deal with some of those issues. So I just spoke to them about that recently, and they just had a hearing on that recently. I'm not directly involved in that project, but they are currently still working on Section 8 discrimination. So some of the work that I'm doing with them now is when I mentioned sort of systemic issues, a lot of those issues are have to do with sort of the project I'm focusing on is race-based discrimination in housing. And it's really, near and dear to my heart. Before I came to Roger Williams, I was a director of investigations at Suffolk Law School and worked in the housing discrimination testing program there. So I'm working directly with the testing coordinator as well as the ED and the staff attorney on an investigation that's happening now. And one of the things that we're doing that I hopefully will, I don't know if you're a 2L or a 3L, or 1L. Oh, great. So hopefully by the time you're a 2L, one of the things that I'm working on in collaboration with Professor Margulies and Logan, as well as Professor Kukis, was an initiative that went to the Rhode Island, forgive me, I'm forgetting the name, it's escaping me at the moment.
Advisory panel.
Thank you, the Rhode Island Advisory Panel, about an inquiry to allow law students and attorneys in Rhode Island that are barred in Rhode Island to do testing work, because Rhode Island is just it's not very well served in terms of capacity for investigations. So having the law students involved in that work would be amazing and really, I think, turn the enforcement powers around, because it just doesn't exist right now. And they're really the only housing agency that services Rhode Island in the way that they do for testing work. So that's one of the things that I'm working on now that hopefully you'll be involved with in the future. So I'll keep you posted about that.
Katie has a background in housing, so.
Oh, excellent. Oh, okay. So I'm preaching to the choir, all of that stuff.
So Carla, did you have a question?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, my question was more, maybe it's looking for suggestions or tips, but once you graduate, once you pass the bar, how do you make connections to these organizations? Do you just kind of throw yourself out there and offer yourself, or especially if I were to move somewhere else, I've got a lot of, I guess Rhode Island, maybe I know a lot of nonprofit organizations that do the work, but where do you start and how do you make those connections?
Well, I'll start. I think wherever you are, if you want to do pro bono work, one place you can start is with the bar association for that state. Most bar associations have either a volunteer lawyers program like we do in Rhode Island, or some other pro bono program. And then I think if you know what area of law you're interested in doing pro bono service in, a quick Google search online will show you both what pro bono opportunities there are to work locally and also to work nationally. For instance, the organization that Professor Gott talked about is a national organization, but they do work locally. There's also ALA. Well, you know all this because you have that background from Dorcas. But so it's not hard. It's and there are a lot of ways that people get into pro bono too. I mean, a couple of our panelists talked about being at big firms, and often big firms do get involved in pro bono, and they get involved in what we call signature projects, sort of big big splash kinds of cases. And so those will often be made available to you if you're at a big firm. And in the event that any of you are thinking about going to a firm, I encourage you to ask them about their pro bono policy and whether they count pro bono time spent on pro bono cases as billable, and whether they encourage their lawyers to do pro bono and how much and so forth. But then there are other ways, for instance, Professor Raposa and Professor Humber, I think, maybe the two of you can talk about how you came to find those opportunities.
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to work with family law and like children in that area. So in my third year of law school, I clerked at the probate and family court in Bristol County. And I clerked with the chief justice there for the entire third year. And so doing that and just getting an internship in the area you're interested in, I think then helps you make connections. So I got to meet all of the Department of Children and Family attorneys who had connections. I got to meet everyone at CPCS who then had connections to these organizations. And so I think that was really helpful, trying to get an internship in maybe the area of interest that you have. And then you can just constantly, I think, make connections. And that's how I honestly did. And then I would go to Bristol County Bar Association events with the judge, and then I started going to them in practice. So even going to those types of events from the Bar Association also got me, I think, to make those connections.
And very occasionally a judge will ask you to take on a pro bono case, right?
Yeah, that definitely happens with me. Yeah, so the judge that I clerked for will refer the pro bono cases a lot, or another judge who went before a lot in Bristol County, Judge Richard McMahon, will refer the case. They always know I don't say no, so that's something. So
We know that too, Professor Raposa. Professor Humber, do you have a?
Sure, yeah, I was going to add to what Professor Raposa said in regards to bar associations. So one of the ways that I made a lot of connections through the Boston Bar Association in particular, which just had a lot of government agencies, a lot of sort of like big players, what have you, was just being on a committee. I know this is, not quite in law school, but when you do graduate, and you just make, if you're on a committee, you just make so many connections. That's how I got connected with the ACLU, any of the federal departments for the folks I know there. Also in the previous work I used to do in civil rights, but, and also I just wanted to add, don't underestimate the power of just like cold calling or emailing and saying, hey, I'm an attorney and I want to help you. People want free help. So, I did that with Greater Boston Legal Services when I was volunteering for them in their housing unit. And I have an amazing relationship with like all the, lead attorneys there. So don't underestimate that.
Right. Professor Logan, did you have something you want to say?
There are a lot of reasons to come to Roger Williams, but one of them is we're the only law school in a small state. And you are never more than one relationship away from people that are making important decisions. And all you got to do is go to Eliza, Susie, Lori, or Veronica Priccio in our career service office, say, who's doing this kind of work? What alums are doing this work? What do you think about me reaching out to Rob Hum, to whoever it is that's out there? And it's amazing. They will never turn you down. One of the alums, our network, we're a vibrant young school with a lot of people that feel like they've got a vested stake in the growth of the institution, and also came to Roger Williams because of this pro bono concern we had. And so you should not feel like this is some weird thing where you might send an email to a partner at a big firm. Send Nicole DeLude Benjamin an email. She will hook you up with pro bono opportunities. And the list is really long and it's really distinctive. I mean, I'm telling you, I taught a bunch of schools. This is something that we've got that very few schools have. With all due respect to Suffolk, you didn't have that in Massachusetts. We have that here in Rhode Island. And it may not be the same broad array of opportunity that you might have if you were at NYU, but there's plenty of opportunities. If you take some initiative and do it strategically through the people that are experts in sort of funneling this, you will find many opportunities to do this, so many that you might not be able to study, which I don't encourage you to do. But the upside here is enormous, and you're in the right place. If you want to do this work, you came to the right school.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question if there's a student who has another question. Jeff?
Thank you, and thank you all. Really loved all the stories. I really appreciate taking the time to speak tonight. Just a general question that could go out for any of the panelists. I was speaking to some of my other law school friends and having a discussion. Oh, what do you want to do? What do you want to do after law school? And they said, well, hey, I've got a 140 grand bill, that I have to pay off. I'll do pro bono in like 10 years. People, how do you react when people keep pushing it off, I'll do it when I pay off the bills. I'll do it when I, oh, I've got all of this. I've got the, mortgage, whatever. Because, from hearing your stories, it feels like this is something that you all feel passionate about, that this is not like, I'm going to kick it down 15 years later, but I'm going to make it part of my everyday. So if people could just speak to that as a closing remark, if we're out of time, just to help people like me who might have debt, but to say, I'm still going to make time to do this.
Lori?
Oh, can I respond quickly? Just, the easiest way to pay off your debt is to go into full-time public service, right? And so far, the federal loan repayment assistance program is still operational. We've had our first alum get a huge amount of debt forgiven last year. So I would say to your friends, we'll do 10 years of full-time public interest work, get your debt forgiven, and then do whatever you want. But I think the other answer is go to a law firm, just go and make a lot of money and pay off your debt, and just find one where you can do pro bono. And I think a lot of the work that Liza and Susie have done through the Pro Bono Collaborative is really trying to change the culture in Rhode Island and make law firms feel responsible for doing their, each lawyer doing 50 hours a year or giving money to pro bono. There's so many ways to do it, and law firms who don't count it as billable hours need to change that. Our state still has a long way to go. Many states, I may be speaking, I don't really know what I'm talking about here, but there are many states where you have to report how much pro bono you do. We are not one of those states. I don't know how many do, but we should be. That makes people, pay attention. When you pay your bar dues in Massachusetts, you can check off whether you want to give $50 to pro bono, and you really have to check it off if you don't want to give it, because you will have given it before you blinked an eye. And so there's a lot that needs to change in Rhode Island, and the more of our students who are out there doing pro bono as alums in law firms, the more of these law firms will change.
I would just add that 1 hour a week is 50 hours or 52 hours. And if whatever law people are practicing, if they can't find an hour a week on average to help people who don't have access to justice, then that's too bad.
I was just going to jump in and also just mention, as someone who's still paying off their loans, like you can have loans and still be able to find time, just like we find time for exercise, or if you're involved in like a spiritual community, right? It's sort of like deciding sort of where to put your time and being thoughtful about how you use your time. I would tell folks, and I get it a lot with students, we're like, why are you making us do something for free? Is for the most part, the stories tonight are not unique, that when you do something that you don't have to do for a greater good, it's really rewarding and it really feeds your professional identity. And lawyers have a bad rap. Like it's an unhealthy profession for many in terms of stress and addiction. I mean, there's a lot of negative sides to being a lawyer. This is like the best of the best, whether you're working directly with a client on a very simple matter or something really complex, like, some of the cases that Peter has worked on, really intellectually stimulating and sophisticated legal work. It feeds who you are as a lawyer. So my feeling is, although students will sometimes say, once I pay off my debt, I'll get back to this, they won't. Because the real thing is, and I think what we're doing really well at Roger Williams, because we have alums doing pro bono when they're 1 to 5 years out, is do it right away. Do it because we all have imposter syndrome. And I actually think many of the attorneys that we work with who are seasoned attorneys, 20 years, 15 years into the practice, they're so super specialized and they're so confident in that one area that they're the ones least likely to go into the prison and like sit down and be a generalist. Like we all can issue spot. We all have the ability to do oftentimes like basic research and connecting. So that is powerful work. And I think when people take gaps and they become really successful in their field and become specialized, they actually are less and less likely to do pro bono. So my feeling is like, if there's any way that you can prioritize this and start doing it immediately, go to a bar association, go to a CLE where they train you how to do family law and you do one, and you're going to be terrified, do it. it's much easier to do it when you're a newbie and you say, oh, I'm just like a few years out, versus someone who's 20 years into their career and they feel like a complete idiot. So that's my just really practical. But plenty of folks are doing public interest work and doing pro bono work with loans. Like the good news is lawyers get paid well, even the ones who don't get paid well, they get paid better than many professions. That's real.
Any panelists have any last comments they want to make before we end for the night?
Yeah, I quickly add, I second everything that Susie said, and I'd say again, it's that skills development piece that it really makes the difference. I'm a far better lawyer because I've been doing pro bono for my entire career for well over 35 years. And that kind of jump in expertise I got because I invested in doing this work, and hopefully I've helped people along the way, but I've also helped myself become a far better attorney.
Thank you. So I want to give a round of applause to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for volunteering to spend this hour with us. Your stories are amazing. Your commitment is just awe-inspiring, and I'm really, really grateful. And thank you too to the law students who I know are incredibly busy, and I hope that you found this informative and inspiring. And if you have any questions about pro bono, you can reach out to me or Susie Harrington-Steppen, or Lisa Quinn or Lori Barron at the Feinstein Center, and we will be able to answer all of your questions. So thank you again, and carry on.
Thanks to all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys. This is great.